poisoning, cutting, intentional overdosing, things like that, whereas men are more likely to use firearms and suffocation. As I mentioned, firearms are the most common means of suicide death, and this is true for civilians and veterans. So in civilian suicide death, it's about 48% use firearms, and in the military, it's about 68%, give or take. White men have the highest rate of suicide mortality and account for more than half of the suicide deaths in Texas and the United States. And this is true again for civilians and for veterans. The reason it's important to keep this in mind is because when you're looking at suicide data, you'll see two different types. So you'll see rates, and then you'll also see raw numbers. And when you're looking at rates, this is like based on proportion, right? And so if we have a very high rate for white men, this is going to change for different ethnicities and or genders, and can minimize major changes that are happening in those other groups, for example. So just something to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at data. Are you looking at raw numbers or are you looking at rates, and what does that indicate for the other groups? So for several years, we've heard the number 22 when it comes to veteran suicide deaths, and that was the number for a long time as far as how many veterans were dying by suicide every day. That eventually came down to about 20, and now we're sitting at about 17.6 suicides per day. When you consider that only 8% of the population is veterans, it's kind of crazy then to think that almost 14% of suicide deaths are veterans. Our population is veterans, yet almost 14% of suicide deaths is that same population. So it's about 1.5 times the civilian rate, which just shows what the magnitude this issue still is, even though we are seeing those numbers go down. And the last bit of data here, 63% of veterans that die by suicide are not engaged in care with the VA. Now, this doesn't mean that they never were or that they don't qualify. It's just that at the time of their death, they are not engaged in care in the VA. And this is important because that can be a risk factor when you're talking to people. If you know that they're an older white man, they're not engaged in care in the VA, a couple other warning signs that Jessica's going to go over, it's just important to know how that combination of those things can really raise a red flag. In 2014, 65% of all veterans who died by suicide were ages 50 and older. I don't want to say older veterans because, again, my boss is in that age group, and I would never call him old. We're just going to say 50-plus veterans. He's making a note right now. He's for my next performance review. But veterans that are over 50, that's 65%, right? And then the highest proportion of military deaths by suicide occurred around 25 years post-service, but then we also see a high rate within that first year. So right at the beginning of their separation and then 25 years later. And so a couple different reasons for that. So that 25-year mark, right, you're thinking older veterans who may also be experiencing additional challenges, chronic illness, loss of a partner or friends, so they're experiencing grief. Kids might be moved out of the house, and so empty nesters, that kind of thing. And so again, just to kind of like this could be a risk factor if someone's in that first year of separation, or they're in their older years. And this last point here, of those deaths that occur in the first year, 43% occur in the first 90 days. And so when you think about this, it kind of makes sense. Like, people are leaving the military, they're leaving their community, they might be moving to a new community, trying to move back home, trying to reintegrate into civilian life. They've lost their sense of community, possibly their sense of purpose. They're looking for a job. They don't know what they're going to do with their life. It's a huge transitory period that puts a lot of unease and instability into their feelings. Okay, cool. Jessica's next.
Oh, I'm pretty short, sorry. So I'll be talking about risk factors. So I just want to start off that there is no single cause for suicide. There are several factors, situations, and circumstances that increase the possibility of suicide. So in this slide, you see some things. So starting off with biological factors, so being diagnosed with a mental disorder, specifically with a mood disorder, make that risk a bit higher. Psychological factors, so issues with impulse control or aggressive tendencies, past history, so any past trauma or past suicide attempts, current life events, so things such as loss or even transitioning from military life to civilian life. All these can really increase the risk of suicide. And then what is a risk factor? Risk factors are characteristics or conditions that increase the chance that someone may attempt suicide. And one way to better understand suicide prevention is to understand risk factors, warning signs, and protective factors. And then starting off with suicide of a loved one. So like Ms. Tara shared, the veteran population is a high-risk population. So a veteran or anyone that is connected with the veteran is more likely to know an individual that has died by suicide, may even know several individuals that died by suicide. The next point here is chronic physical illness and pain. Some individuals that served in the military may have gotten injured and have service-connected injuries such as traumatic brain injury, paralysis, limited range of motion, just several other sort of types of injuries that may affect their day-to-day life. Divorce and separation. Regarding divorce and separation, veterans are more than 60% more likely to separate or divorce. And that's just due to reconnecting with their family. Sometimes when they're being deployed or move around a lot, trying to come back into the family can be a little hard to mesh with. Loss of employment and financial problems. So regarding that, some of the skills that they learned within the military doesn't always translate in civilian life. So that's problematic. Legal problems and arrests. So regarding that, it is noted that veterans make up about 8% of veterans make up 8% of all those imprisoned in federal and state facilities. Veterans incarcerated are more likely to be older, and crimes veterans are convicted of tend to be violent crimes. So this really can affect their employment and what they can get jobs in. Victims of crime and abuse. So something that's pretty talked about is military sexual trauma. 1 in 3 female veterans report experiencing sexual military trauma, and 1 in 50 male veterans report experiencing military sexual trauma. Witness to violence, that's pretty self-explanatory. Let's see, and then lack of social support. So for many veterans transitioning from military life to civilian life, they lose that connection, that brotherhood, use of alcohol and other substances. Military culture, alcohol is pretty heavily involved, right? And so in celebrations, and people get promoted. Some of them use it as a way to socialize, to cope, against that. History or current mental illness. So a pretty big one is post-traumatic stress disorders. And a lot of the symptoms really affect their day-to-day, right? So one of the biggest symptoms of that would be insomnia, right? So, and that's a big, huge risk factor. Feelings of being a burden. So many of these risk factors I've already listed can make someone feel a burden. Any previous suicide attempts and history of trauma. So for many individuals that join the military, they are known to have childhood trauma. So it's almost like they're re-traumatizing themselves again when they join the military, in some cases. And does anyone know what the difference between a risk factor or a warning sign is? Any guesses? No? No, it's okay, I can answer. So a warning signs are indicators that an individual may be in acute danger and urgently needs help, and risk factors are a combination of situations or circumstances that increase the possibility of suicide, but they might not be direct causes. So the way I like to describe each of these things is warning signs is kind of like the flashing lights of an ambulance, right? So it's like very urgent, they need to get there like right away. And risk factors are more so like the, I don't know, like the yellow flashing light when it comes to like the traffic lights, like you need to slow down, kind of take notice, right, take pause sort of thing. Right? And then some warning signs are loss of interest in activities usually found enjoyable. So, for example, being interested in some sort of hobby, maybe you're interested in soccer, all of a sudden you don't want anything to do with it, it's no longer fun for you. Verbally talking or writing about suicide. So some people may be really direct where they'll say, I really just want to die, no longer want to be here. And some people may be passive about it and they'll say, geez, I'd rather not be here. I wonder what it would be like if I wasn't alive. Decreased social interactions, self-care, and grooming. So social interaction, right? They're isolating themselves, withdrawing from people, self-care. They're no longer, taking care of their sleep or how they're eating or just their well-being. And then grooming, no longer showering or brushing their teeth. Feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness. There's some people maybe feeling like, what's the point? Why am I even here? Nothing matters. And then putting affairs in order, giving things away or making changes in their will. So, for example, if somebody has something that's really valuable to them and all of a sudden they're like, here you go, you can have it, that's a big red flag. And then stockpiling medication or obtaining other lethal means. So regarding the other lethal means, this can be other things that they can use to potentially kill themselves. So things like ropes, belts, sharps, so knives, pocket knives, kitchen knives. And last but not least, firearms, right? So we're in Texas. Everyone and their grandma probably has firearms. So it's really important that during this time period of crisis, that we let them know that temporarily we want to just keep them safe from the firearm. And again, temporarily, emphasize that. Increased use of alcohol and other substances, and dramatic change in mood. So, for example, someone that's typically very chipper or happy, all of a sudden they're really depressed and just no longer there, right? And so the opposite can be true. So someone that all of a sudden was really depressed and just not in a good place, all of a sudden they're happy and really just excited. Any guesses why that would be an issue? So yeah, the reason why it can be pretty alarming if somebody's mood is positive as well is they probably made peace with the fact that they're going to try to kill themselves. And then what is a protective factor? Protective factors are characteristics or traits or supports that make an individual less likely to attempt suicide. So access to efficient mental health treatment, family and community support, that's very important for the connection part, healthy coping skills, cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicide, protection from lethal means, again, just keeping time and distance between the things that they can use to potentially kill themselves with, having a sense of purpose or meaning in life, and hope for the future. Last one is having a sense of responsibility for others. I know for myself, my 3 dogs just make me want to be here, to get me going. Other people would say kids, but I wouldn't really know how that works, so yeah. And some things to consider. Warning signs, risk factors, and protective factors are not cumulative. I always trip on that word. That is, people may have many protective factors and only have one warning sign and still be at high risk. So an example of that is they may have, their family may be really supportive and community behind them, however, they may still feel very hopeless and worthless. And then there are minimal differences between children, adolescents, and adults regarding warning signs, risk factors, and protective factors. And most people thinking of suicide do not want to die, rather they are experiencing unbearable pain and are unable to see other options available to stop the pain. So again, it's not necessarily that they don't want to be alive, it's just that pain that they have is really just there and just it doesn't let them live their life. People experiencing thoughts of suicide often do not have access to positive coping mechanisms, and this is very true with those that were in the military. They're taught to be stoic, to block their emotions. So having that safe space for them to really unwind get coping skills is really important. Encouraging and helping the individual to think of reasons to live and reasons for hope can be very helpful. And just looking at their strengths and, telling them that that's how they can work on things stuff. And I'll turn it back to Tara.
I have a question. Could you, on what you said about the person accepting the fact that they're going to die, what, the changing the mood, do they actually, I mean, how does that work? And how will we know that they're, it's difficult, I mean, to even notice.
Right, and I would say when it's pretty drastic, where you've been with them for a couple of days, really, really down, really, really depressed, and all of a sudden, it's just kind of like a switch, where they're all of a sudden really excited, really happy. I would check in with them. I'd be like, hey, recently you've been feeling really low, all of a sudden there's been a flip. So just check in with them for sure. Yeah, no problem.
All right, what can you do? So if someone that you are working with or someone that you know is exhibiting warning signs, it's important to be clear and direct when you're communicating with them. So instead of using phrases like, are you thinking about harming yourself? Which could mean anything. I mean, someone could be like, yeah, man, I'm thinking about getting blackout drunk tonight. It's probably not the best thing for me. Like they could say, yeah. They could also engage in non-suicidal self-harm, like cutting, as I mentioned before. There's other behaviors like banging your head against the wall, things like that. Like harming yourself could be taken many different ways. So it's important to be very direct. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about wanting, or do you want to die? Are you considering suicide, right? Clear, direct, concise, to the point. It can be very uncomfortable and can be very harsh, but it's super important because this way you're not misconstruing anything. They're not misinterpreting your question. And it's also important when you're asking to eliminate any kind of judgmental tones that could be taken poorly. For example, you're not thinking about killing yourself, are you? Probably not the most helpful thing, right? We want to be able to hold space, have compassion, not show judgment, but instead show care and empathy. So if they're having, we'll repeat myself here. So if they're having thoughts of suicide, listen and be non-judgmental. Let them know that you care. Let them know that you want to help keep them safe and that you are willing to do what you can and what you're capable of to make that happen. Believe what they say. Just before this presentation, actually, Jessica and I were talking about a client that she had where it was a mother-daughter, and the daughter was considering suicide, and the mother was like, nope, she's just saying that to get attention. Well, we never know if that's the case or not, and if they are actually considering it or not. So it's important to always take things very seriously and believe what they're saying, right? It's not very often that people are going to disclose to you that they're thinking of killing themselves if that is not in fact the case. When you can offer hope, I know this can seem very challenging, especially if things are going poorly in this person's life, right? But that hope can be just that little mustard seed of hope. This person is still alive for a reason, right? They have not yet killed themselves for a reason. There's something that has kept them hanging on. It might be the dog, it might be a job, it might be that little glimmer that things could change and or could get better. It could be the potential for a job or a mirage of things, but something has kept them here. And so if you are in that space where you can have that conversation with them, I know this might seem somewhat overwhelming, but if you're in that space where you can have that conversation, keep them there, help resource them. What has kept them here on this side of the ground until now? And then finally, get help. So again, we have the National Suicide Prevention Hotline on Lifeline on the piece of paper, and we'll give you some resources at the end. There's a multitude of resources, especially in the greater Austin area, that are available for veterans and their family members. And stay with them until you're able to hand them off to somebody else, especially if they're in crisis and they're in imminent danger. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is on there. It's 24/7, free, confidential, and it's not just somebody to talk to. They have a lot of crisis and suicide prevention resources for employers, for loved ones, friends, and professionals who are interacting with people who may be experiencing thoughts of suicide. But the most important thing is just be willing to help. And honestly, the fact that you guys are here this morning and here for this presentation shows that you care. This is a topic you care about. So we super appreciate that. learning about suicide and mental health, again, being here, looking at different resources, taking part in suicide prevention activities. There's a multitude of trainings. Again, I've got a slide for that. But if you're looking for something more intensive than this and more specific in training, then those are available to you. Be there to help others in crisis and change the conversation about suicide, right? Doing what you can to talk about it, to reduce stigma, and to be more aware of the way that you're talking about suicide and the language that we're using around suicide. Training resources. So these are 3 different types of trainings that are available. Ask About Suicide to Save a Life is a 2.5-hour training. It's done in person and virtual, and this is geared towards suicide, but it's really a great opportunity to practice asking those really difficult questions. I've taken it myself. It's fantastic. Assist, the second one, is a full 2-day training. Very intensive, but it is very, very good. This was the first suicide training that I took several years ago. It's very realistic in the training. It's very lifelike. It's not, kind of the role plays where like, what's coming. It's very real. I would suggest that you are in the correct headspace before you take that one, though. And then mental health first aid, MHFA. This is the training for all different types of mental health, but again, is geared towards having those difficult conversations, not just about suicide, even when someone's experiencing depression or anxiety or things like that. So suicide is a small fraction of it, but also just want to mention it because it's really great. There's some web resources here: Suicide Prevention Resource Center, AFSP, which has multiple chapters. They're the ones that do the Out of the Darkness walk, if you've ever seen those, to prevent suicide. The Columbia Lighthouse Project. This is based on the what they call the Columbia, which is like the most common suicide assessment that clinicians use, and so they kind of pair with them. And Live Through This is a project that talks about stories for suicide attempt survivors. So it's portraits of them and their stories. So you can hear the stories of these people who did attempt suicide but then survived that attempt. Crisis lines. The NSLP is on here. I should also note too that this is going to change in July to 988. So how we have 911, we've had 911 for eons and decades and things. 988 is going to be the 911 equivalent for those that are in a mental health crisis, and that will happen in July. The crisis text line, and then the Trevor Project. I added this on here because this is geared towards youth, but if you're working with someone and part of their stressors is that their child is experiencing stressors and going through life challenges, this is a good one to know. And then our emails are here. I'll leave this up. And then I would say we'll do questions at the very end. Great. Yeah, so our emails are there if you guys want to take note of that, if you have any questions for us, or need to get in contact with us down the road, but we'll have time for Q&A after.
I'm a little taller, so I got to put this up.
You call me short?
I didn't say that. I had to make an adjustment. No, thank you, Tara and Jessica, as our distinguished Hollywood actors straight from Hollywood this morning get in place. But a couple things. Number one, all the veterans in the room, who's veterans in the room and online, I want to thank you for your service for being here today. You know what we're talking about, and so this is very important. We'd like to address that this is a joint effort with HHSC, CVC, PWC, because it's reaching, yes, we're focused on veterans, but I can tell you this training reaches the entire customer base. We all know, I know Gabriel and I have worked with veterans with suicide that were thinking of suicide in a workforce center. So it is something that happens. I don't say on a daily basis, but it happens. We like to keep stuff simple, and they talked about the Columbia. This is, you have a handout, and we can post it online. It'll be in the final one, the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. And it's 6 questions. It's very formal. I mean, it's very easy to follow. And if they answer 4, 5, and 6, that is immediate help. Do not leave the person alone. And it has the suicide hotline on there. Obviously, call 911, and it gives you the basic instructions. And it's just keeping it simple that way. So as we walk through the skit with our 2 distinguished actors, that's what we're going to be using. There will be audience participation because we're going to need your help in answering some of the questions. So as I mentioned before, Craig O'Shea Jackson is our ES staff member, better known as Ice Cube. And then we got Gabriel Lopez, known as Joe Barracuda. And here we go. So Craig O'Shea Jackson, yeah, already got that part. Craig has been assisting Joe over the last 2 weeks. Craig has sat down with Joe several times to assist him with his resume, job search, and has general conversations. In the past, Joe Barracuda has had a positive attitude and has been upbeat during the conversations. DelRio was referred to Craig after the veterans triage was properly conducted at the front desk. I always will hammer veterans triage. All right, Craig approaches Joe.
Hello,
Hello, Joe. How are you doing today?
how am I doing? It's just another day, but I'm still looking for employment.
Let's go back to my cubicle and see where we're at.
All right. Nice place you got here.
Joe follows Craig to his cubicle, and Craig pulls up Joe's Work in Texas account.
Joe, I see that you've applied for 10 jobs in a couple of different industry areas. Have you received any calls for interviews?
Nah, not yet. I've applied for 100 jobs and have only received 3 interviews. Can you believe that? It's like no one wants to give me a chance. I'm going through a divorce, it's taking all my money. If I do not find any type of employment soon or some way to make money, I'm going to be beyond the hurt locker. I'm telling you.
Joe, I understand. I'm here to help. Let's take a look at the positions you are applying for in your resume.
Look, I'm tired of targeting my resume to the different job you're saying. I'm applying for. If it's not up to me to get the job, I'm done. This is it. I'm tired of my parents helping me out to get a place to live and paying my bills. My VA counselor wants me to make 3 appointments a week. Can you believe that? How am I going to work? I don't have time for that.
Joe, I hear you. I know you're frustrated. Gaining employment can take a little time. Let's take a look at your resume that we developed together. Do you have a friend or family member that you can talk to regarding your situation? Do you have any social support other than your parents?
So you're asking me if I'm frustrated? Geez. No, I don't have anyone really close to me. I keep mostly to myself. I don't want anybody to know about my business, except Dooley Do-Right. I speak to Dooley, but he really does not listen to me. He just tells me what he thinks I should do. Thank you for your time. It is my afternoon to spend with the kids. Do you have time to meet with me on Monday morning?
All right, Craig checks the schedule and schedules a meeting for 09 on Monday. So going through this is audience participation. Are there any risk factors that Joe showed? Let's ask these 2 ladies in the front table here. This is a check, make sure you're paying attention, still awake.
He sounds frustrated, like he's at his peak already, like I'm done with what's, I mean, it was very obvious, like I could tell. If he was my client coming to me, I'll call you right away.
That's right behind you, Gabriel.
Oh, sorry.
One of the things that I noticed was he did say he's going through divorce, so his wife was, I guess, leaving him. His parents were paying for a lot of his bills, so maybe he doesn't have the financial support. And it seems like he's alone, so there's some self-medication going on there.
Definitely right. Anybody else?
Employment, financial status, the relationship, being frustrated with the system as far as trying to get a job. So,
Absolutely. Now here's a tough question: do we think at this point he's confident that he's? Do we think that he's thinking of suicide at this time? Is it the right time to ask the question, are you thinking of killing yourself? Do we have enough information? And a lot goes on the body language as well. But who wants to answer that question? I'll go over to Dr. Harris on this one. He's got a doctor. He's a doctor.
I'd say there's no wrong time to ask. So if you're seeing warning signs, particularly with somebody you've worked with a couple times and they're presenting down and out and different, it doesn't cost anything to ask.
And that's what you really base it off. If you work with someone over a period of time, you get to kind of know the feel. Because I know we have people come to workforce centers, and you know that they will, hey, just having a bad day. And they're going to tell you the whole life story and all this, but at the end of the day, you're going to see them. You can see them tomorrow, you can see them next week.
And here's another thing, in the script. Joel mentioned that he has applied to over 100 jobs. And those of us that work in the working Texas, we want to help the guy. But that builds up a lot more frustration for him because he's just applying, and not getting any feedback, any positive feedback back. So that also, we see it in our clients when we talk to them. We see them, we just want to push those job positions in there, and the veteran gets really, really frustrated. And we see that. We are the front line, if you will, when we see that warning sign that it's not just about applying. There has to be something else that is preventing the veteran from employment.
No, excellent point. And so like said, there's no time to, I mean, you could ask it and go and start using the scale. And that's what questions 1 and 2. Have you wished you were dead or wish you'd go to sleep and not wake up? That's question 1. And 2, have you actually had any thoughts about killing yourself? Those are 2 hard questions, but up front in this situation, if they answer no, then you know they're right. If they answer yes, then they need to seek behavioral health. Doesn't need to be, it's immediate. Yes, ma'am. You gonna say anything? No? Okay. I thought you were ready to say. So it's tough. It's tough to decide, but there are risk factors and things there that gotta clue you in. All right, we fast forward to Monday after the weekend. And I put down on the paper, go your gut feeling. After a while, you get a gut feeling that something's not right. I mean, you just kind of develop it after time, and you know, or at least know to say, hey, it triggers to start asking the question. All right, so we're going to scene 2. You guys are getting paid for this. Not very much, but you get paid. This is identify warning signs. All right, Craig is at the front desk waiting on Joe. Craig notices Joe is running late. Joe comes in, and Craig can see right away Joe is visibly upset. Craig also notices that Joe did not shave, he did not comb his hair, is shoveled, and his dress is different. Joe is usually clean cut and dressed in business casual.
Hello, Joe. Let's go back to my office. It would be a better place to meet.
Joe does not say anything, just looks upset and follows Craig into the office. Craig closes the door.
Joe, is everything all right? How can I help you?
You can't. I'm done looking for work. Over 100 positions, not one calls me back. Not one of the employers that I interviewed with told me I was even overqualified for the position. Well, if I'm overqualified, shouldn't I get the job? I cannot pay my bills, child support, car payment. I'm no use to anyone. I'm worthless.
Joe, you are not worthless. You are just going through a difficult time. You got to see your children on Friday. You know how important you are to them?
Greg, I appreciate what you're saying. I just don't see a way out of all this issues. I do not enjoy fishing anymore, and I'm tired of being a burden.
Craig immediately reverts back to his training.
Joe, I care about you. I'm going to ask you a few tough questions. Have you wished you were dead or wish you could go to sleep and not wake up?
Yes, that will help a lot of problems, solve a lot of problems.
Have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself?
Oh yes, I got a plan too.
Joe, you are important to a great number of people.
Craig follows the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, and then he goes to question 3 because he answered yes on question 2.
Have you been thinking about how you might do this?
Yes, I have all the pain meds that the VA gives me from my last surgery and from the previous surgery. I could just go to sleep and never wake up.
Have you had these thoughts and had some intention on acting on them?
Yes, and I thought about how to carry it out. I told you, I got a plan. Everything will work out fine if I just do this.
All right, Craig realizes he must seek media attention, and that's where he goes at this time with several options. 911 is number probably the best option. The other option is the VA, or we call it the VA suicide or the hotline, but I think it's nationwide, it's for all, it's the same number, right? So, and I know I personally have used this on a Sunday night, working with a veteran, calling them, work with a veteran to say, look, stay on the call, I'm gonna call them and talk to them, ask them to call you directly, and they did. And then they spoke with him because he's in crisis management. But obviously, Joe's in crisis management. Now, I know if it was me, you keep asking them questions, you're just gonna elevate it even more, because that's how veterans are. They go from 0 to 1, you keep asking the question. And so, you have to use the gut feeling. You got to use the body language of the veteran that you're working with and his situation. But if they immediately say, I got a plan and I got the pills, hey, you don't have to ask any more questions. Now you got to act. And this is how it goes. Sometimes these situations are this direct. Am I right, Gabriel? And other times they're very, very subtle. And so it can come in many different ways. It's just if you catch it in time. And sometimes you may not catch it right away if it's subtle. It may be to the next client and think about, oh, wait a minute, the individual said this. It's definitely worth a call back, a text back to the individual you're working with that make sure you never had that conversation. Well, let's give a round of applause to our distinguished actors. I think we'll give them a donut and a free cup of coffee. I think that's going to be payment. All right, and we'll ask them to stay up here at this time. I got the 15-minute mark. So is there any questions online or in the room for Tara and Jessica?
Was there a follow-up afterwards with that veteran, and were there instructions given to you as well to stay with that veteran?
So it was really interesting. He called me on the phone. I was actually coming from a gun range of all places on a Sunday night. I was coming back. All the way back from Burnett, or close to Burnett Inn, I talked to him for the 45 minutes back. I got home, I said, now I can stop, or I could have stopped anywhere, but he just, kept him on the phone, I know he was good. Finally convinced him to do that. I did not get a follow-up back from the VA, but I do know that the VA was contacted, and I do know, because I had the number on my phone, I contacted the veteran the next day, and he was doing much better, and the VA stayed on with him and got him the help that day. So that's the only call. It wasn't from the VA, as I had the number, I called him back. But I do know it works. I think, Gabriel, you got one or so with the VA hospital, right? Experience.
Oh, yes, down in Laredo.
You want to share one of your experience where it worked?
Well, this is, in Laredo we have, it's a small community, so this veteran here was really, really, really tough. I mean, he had gone through a lot of issues, a divorce, and everything that you can think of, except the guy never said anything. He was always quiet, he was always good until the day he just exploded. Luckily, we worked with him. It actually, the cry out came out from one of his family members, and we were able to get the assistance. And it's a sad story because he was going down the right path. He had all the warning signs. He was under medication. He was all that. Just all of a sudden, decides to go visit relatives in Mexico and blows himself up. I mean, it's sad story, but it happens. It really does happen. I mean, it's sad because you feel incompetent, you can't do anything, and these are the kind of stories that we hear, that we see on a day, every day.
Anything Tara or Jessica would like to add?
I was just going to add, when we're talking about the suicide lifeline, I always encourage people to put it in your phones, right? Like, it's like right there, you can take 30 seconds out and just add it as a contact, just suicide lifeline, add that in so that you always have it. That was the only thing I was going to add.
And when you call, if you don't exactly know what to do, like what steps to take, they'll guide you and they'll let you know what steps to take.
Couple things to add. There are many, the ASK program, and many. This is just one. And so I think as we go forward working with free agencies, we can probably develop a standard one that we could put out so everybody's on the same sheet of music. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But ask the question if you see someone in need. We know right now that COVID has looked at a lot of studies the last couple of weeks. Some say it's suicide rate is up for the general population. Some say the evidence is not. They don't have it. It's circumstantial. I'm not a rocket scientist. All I know is you got pandemic. You got people that did lose their jobs coming back. There was a lot of money that was out there to help people that needed rent and assistance. That money is pretty much used up. And so we're entering a very, I think, an interesting time period as far as where we're going. And of course, where the economy is going right now, we know that we're on a downhill trend as far as what's going on in the economy. We know last year that an active duty component of the Army, their suicide rate was up significantly. And we know here the Texas Army National Guard, their suicide rate was up significantly. And so these are all, with the many military installations we have in the state, and our National Guard soldiers, they're citizen soldiers, so they belong to the communities already here in Texas. So we know it doesn't take all these different contributing factors coming off these missions, the economy, so to put us on alert that we have to be extra vigilant and to identify risk factors, warning signs.
Mr. Gear, also on the phones, and I learned this from the spouse of a veteran, and I think it's cute. It's very, very, very wise. When you program the number on your phone, sometimes when you say suicide prevention, it just really doesn't, people don't want to use that word. So she said that she programmed the number, and instead of putting suicide prevention, she put it in case of emergency. And I said, well, that's neat. And the guy actually did call because it had in case of emergency. It didn't have suicide prevention, because we all know that has a negative effect on veterans. So, thank you.
That's actually good. You say suicide prevention, everybody goes the other way. So you're absolutely right. We did have this one point brought up by VSOs and heard it. I think Dr. Harris talked about it. Some saying if you intervene or ask a question and someone committed suicide, hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you going to kill yourself? They go ahead and they how you put it in the right language? Direct die by suicide. That you're held liability, that you're liable for it in the civil court. And I know this, one of the VSOs is a major discussion in one of the meetings. You know what? I'm not a legal person, but I think you can fight that. You want to answer that one? That is a question that does come up.
Yeah. In Texas, there's good faith laws for any mental health professional looking to help save lives, but at the end of the day, no, there is no liability for asking about suicide. And one thing that research has shown is you will never put the idea in someone's head. So, as Mr. Gear was saying, trust your gut. If you notice and you're thinking about asking, ask. And if they say yes, they're thinking about it, then you could go through the steps that were just outlined, get them some services. But you're never going to put the idea in someone's head, and you're never, by asking about suicide, you're never going to cause a suicide. If their pick is given some kind of signs that you recognize that make you ask that, then there's something there. So if your radar's up, ask. And there's no, legal recourse for asking about suicide.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. All right. Any other? Yes, sir.
We had a comment from the chat, and the comment at the chat was to ask someone what's going on in their head.
And someone who is thinking about the act?
Yeah, and I guess in addition to the questions you all recommended.
Oh, like they're recommending that as like a suggestion, right? Like, yeah, which is a great way, because you're asking it in an open-ended way, right? And it's just sort of like saying, like, tell me more. So saying like what's going on in your head is just an invite for them to share, which is a great thing. Once you have more details, and like they were talking about gut feelings and stuff, like for sure ask the question directly, are you thinking about killing yourself? But if you're talking with someone and you're noticing that change in mood, or just something's different or off, saying, what's going on in your head is a very non-invasive, gentle way for them to share. I think that's a great way to put it.
I usually ask the question when I see I usually ask the first question when I meet with the veterans. I always ask, what's going on in your world? And then that's a great way to open up a conversation and start thinking about anything, and then you can lead on to something else. But what's going on in your world, it can go any way. Thank you.
George, did you want to say anything? Oh, all right. Mike over there. Well, it's going to Mike. 11th day of every month. It's a state law. It's state law, state of Texas. American Legion's also on the national level. American Legion does this nationally. They do a buddy check. So they assign, or you call a buddy. You call one of your veterans or a buddy, and I would implore anybody to call anyone that you know that has potential to even be at risk. It's just a phone call. Hey, how you doing? How are things going? And then, of course, you could take it from there depending on the conversation. That's a great point, George. So the 11th day of the month is pretty easy for veterans because in Veterans Day, but it is something that is definitely has got to be helping. It's got to be helping, and I know I got to get better at it. It's something that everybody can do easily. I'm gonna start calling you every 11th of every month. Yes, sir.
And this is just to kind of recap, just from lived experience and professional and things like that. One of the things that our nation's fighting force is conditioned to do is to fight and win wars, and we as in I'm using my personal experience, we're not trained to really cope, or we're conditioned not to cope. And so what programs are there? I know there's programs there where you have your quarterly brief and you talk about suicide and things like that and you go your way. There's really no follow through, there's no really small group engagement, there's no really personalization. It's just check the block. And it's kind of the same way in the community. And so kind of, I'm a solution focused person, and I've always thought, how can we go out and outreach and really engage with the community? Because when we're at this point where it's prevention, now you're reactive, and you're already kind of not past the point, but you're at a worse point. And so just from personal experience, I'm one of the veterans who was one of the statistics, and so I understand when you get to a point you're like, I don't want to tell anyone because now they're gonna look at me because I'm weak. Now they're gonna look at me because of I'm not functional. And so it's funny because I looked at all the check marks, and I was injured, check. I was on profile, couldn't do anything, check. I was a sergeant first class, I was higher rank, check. It was just a lot of things going on. My wife was leaving me, check. And so there was no follow through. Even though the signs were there was no outreach. It was, well, you did your brief, check. But did we really engage? We know the people, but did we be proactive? And so that's kind of my thing, and my mantra moving forward is, what are we doing moving forward? What are we doing proactive to reach out to these individuals before it even begins? Hey, I understand that these are going on. Let's talk about counseling and see if that's even an issue for you or something that you're interested in. And so that's just kind of my thoughts.
That's a big question. Right, we're in the prevention mode. We need to get in a proactive mode. So we're stopping it before it even becomes a thought and doing that to the outreach and engagement. I mean, will we ever stop at 100%? No, it's like the homeless veterans. It's not going to happen. But can we put a dent on a 17 by being proactive? What you said, I would encourage you to speak with George, Tara, Jessica, and Dr. Harris over here after this, because that's really their lane in their department, and I bet they'd be happy to talk with you and get your contact information and continue discussion. All right, I think we're at time, right? So thank you attending. Thank you online for attending. Thanks, Jessica, Tara, and our distinguished actors, Gabriel and Blair. And thank you for being here.
My agent is right outside the door for any contracts, so you can just check with him.
Yeah, I think that Lee did a great job. Are you done your notes now? Yeah, you both did well. A good thing.
Yeah.
No,